Alright, I get it. Clearly, this enigmatic wanderer deserves its own video. Okay, quick recap. Last time, on accidentally upsetting one of my favorite fandoms, I asked if Frisk from Undertale could solo the multiversal roster of Indie Cross. And there, I gave the nail-wielding poster child of Hollow Knight a pretty tough time. Now, you don't need to watch that episode to follow this one, but I bring it up because by the next morning, my comments were stacked from here to Hallownest, demanding a swift explanation for my Shade Lord slander, lest I be cast into the abyss. So, why not? With the era of Silksong finally upon us, now's the perfect time to revisit a matchup the fandoms have clashed over for years, and finally settle on a definitive answer for why a battle of the world below's tiny hollow godslayers genuinely was never close. Now, with an intro like that, I do want to make it clear I love Hollow Knight. It's my favorite Metroidvania of all time. It's got peak music, goated art direction, amazing boss fights, and you can best believe I want to stay well within the fandom's good graces to cover this series again as a devout Silksong truther. But when it comes to power scaling, those great qualities start looking a whole lot more like a grim class nightmare. This game is abstract, poetic, fragmented, and most of all, really complicated. Put it one way, if Undertale, with its 3 endings and sub-10 hour playthrough, can leave people thinking Dora the Explorer beat God with a stick, then Hollow Knight, with its 5 endings, no humans, Shakespearean dialogue, and 20+ hour runs, might as well be an indiscernible ancient text to the realm of my dad can beat your dad type power scaling. And again, while I really enjoy that about the game, there's a reason why people often call our little ghost a god of gods in one breath, yet in the next ask if they'd lose to a normal human. People, in general, just really struggle to grasp the strength of things that are historically cute and tiny. So yeah, it makes sense why fans got mad when I casually dropped this mythological entity into a tier list among the likes of Freddy Fazbear and Miss Strawberry Beefcake over here. There's genuinely just a lot more layers to what makes the knight so dangerous compared to your typical combatant. And most of it comes down to deep personal interpretation of the game's hyper-dense lore. But specifically, there's one broad concept found in Hollow Knight that a lot of people seem to believe should warrant universe-busting power for this tiny traveler, which is obviously a pretty big step up from running the Fade with Bob the Builder, and could certainly sway their chances in almost any fight. To explain this universal knight argument though, it goes something like this. To unlock the Dream No More or Embrace the Void endings, the knight has to defeat and transcend a pantheon of godlike entities called the Higher Beings. These beings exist above all other bugs in Hallownest, and are frequently shrouded in vague statements of eternal, endless, or limitless strength. The strongest of them, the Radiance, rules over the Dream Realm, a sprawling, surreal dimension made from the dreams of every bug, living or dead. Within this realm, she manages to control or destroy all the people and places connected to the seemingly massive space through her infection. So, if the post-Voidheart Knight can canonically no-hit boss rush these reality-manipulating gods, including a stronger Radiance, then boom, that's textbook universal power, right? Well, there are definitely characters who reach a universal tier by scaling to alternate, artificial, or even dream realities. Here's my issue with applying that logic to the Knight. For this to work, the Dream Realm would need to be a literal universe, with infinite size and 3-dimensional space. Two big assumptions that this usually tight-lipped game goes pretty far out of its way to contradict. The official Fangamer manual calls the Dream Realm a plane beyond the physical world, while the Seer describes it as a space between body and soul. Both claims allude to the idea of a non-physical astral plane, even before acknowledging the more obvious concept that this dream world is canonically made of dreams, which in Hollow Knight lore, dreams are made of essence, a spiritual light that you can't conventionally see or hold in the same way as, say, a rock. And while the game never outright confirms the Dream Realm is non-physical, it would help to explain why the Knight can't die there. As with only 2 exceptions, if you lose all your masks in a dream, you just wake up, unharmed, even in the very strict permadeath mode. Of course, someone might argue controlling infinite dream magic is still a type of infinite power, and honestly, I'd probably agree if we weren't already given so much evidence that the Dream Realm isn't infinitely big either. Take Dreamgate as the most obvious example. This ability lets the Knight travel through the Dream Realm at will, but its own description warns some areas may lack a strong connection to any dream, disallowing use of the Dreamgate, implying the Dream Realm is so limited that ordinary places in Hallownest exist outside its scope, because no one ever dreamed of them. Which makes sense when considering that even the Pale King and Godseeker seemingly had to create new dreams to house the White Palace and Godhome respectively, rather than these places just already existing somewhere in an infinite universe. Pretty definitively establishing at least a reasonable suspicion that the Dream Realm is neither a literal space nor an infinite dimension. And just to level with you here, it's not like the Radiance ever tried to blow up the Dream Realm or something. And the Dream Realm isn't dependent on the Radiance either. As far as we know, she doesn't create it or hold it together, she simply draws power from it in the same way as all other higher beings. So all we really know about dream scaling are that some vague characters control vague portions of a vague dimension, leaving us in this awkward metaphysical limbo where we simply have no clue how powerful the Knight's greatest foes and accomplishments should be. While you could obviously still try to make some arguments in favor of a higher scale without the Dream Realm, if you stretch every last hyperbolic, endless, or limitless statement in the game to its most overly literal conclusion, these statements are, again, very clearly meant to be taken hyperbolically, where infinite can simply mean very large, or they have nothing to do with power at all, such as endless dreams referring to time, not size. A similar concept also applies to certain titles, such as godlike or higher being. Many casual fans will tend to believe things like X character beat a god, so they're god level, without fully understanding that gods in media aren't always made as equals. To borrow an analogy from Undertale, Deltarune's Lightners are called gods by their darker counterparts for giving them sentience, just like the higher beings did for bugs in Hollow Knight. But are we really about to say Birdly is busting universes? Sure, godlike can mean strength, but it's often just as valid to be weird powers or a massive ego, all depending on context. Now, am I saying there's absolutely no way the Knight could reach this cosmic level? Of course not. If New Lore in Farloom clarifies all this, or if Team Cherry just says, yo, he's totally a universe buster, I'll be the first in line with a Knight versus Goku isn't close agenda. But until then, how do we logically scale Hollow Knight? Are we back to cute little bug weaker than your average sitcom character? Nah, it's not that bad. To reprise past me's supposed hot take opinion under this new light, the Knight scales to Hornet, who can survive large explosions in a cinematic ending. Now, yes, comment section, I know the Knight is way stronger than a pre-Silksong Hornet. We beat her multiple times in a playthrough, long before unlocking our true lore-accurate power. However, despite the obvious gap between these siblings, due to the pure, convoluted nature of this game, along with Hornet's crash-out personality, you won't find a single measurable feat in all of Hallownest more impressive than Hornet tanking the Black Egg's destruction. In fact, Hornet makes everyone else's showings look so bad by comparison that she'd probably steal the top 3 slots in terms of raw feats, whether by destroying this stone bridge during Silksong's opening cutscene, fighting this giant robot in mini trailers, or the aforementioned Black Egg explosion. Of course, I don't want to put any hard labels on the series, since this is all bound to change in the newest release, but these showings, while varying a little bit based on how tall you think Hornet is, realistically can't get higher than building level. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that all of Pantheon 5 are overblown bug zapper victims. All I'm getting at is that measuring the gap between building busting Hornet and the real top tiers is easier said than done, especially when Hornet herself implies she could fight the titular Hollow Knight, if not nerfed by the Black Egg. Something later proved in the post-Void Heart endings, which is important since a mere shade of the Hollow Knight can harm the Radiance, implying whatever difference exists between normal nail-wielding bugs and higher beings might not really be as big as you'd think. However, mentioning the Black Egg does actually raise one important point that some were upset I never addressed in my original explanation: the Knight's unique abilities. If you've never played a Metroidvania, one of the genre's biggest appeals is collecting a Swiss Army knife of powers to deal with everything from platforming to puzzle solving and even combat. Of course, as the GOAT of its genre, Hollow Knight easily delivers in this department, with spells, nail arts, movement tech, and well over 4 million possible charm loadouts. And while sure, not every combination is bound to be good, the sheer variety grants them a nigh Batman-esque ability to deal with even the most bizarre of situations. But even beneath all that, there's a deeper narrative layer where the Knight transcends beyond its bug abilities to make it the sole hero capable of saving Hallownest. They are a vessel, a creature of undeath, specifically born to imprison divine beings, and fueled by one of the game's most esoteric forces, Void. Now, Void isn't your typical magical energy. It's a primordial substance, described as force that could deny time, and the power opposed to dreams. The Knight, however, unlike their siblings, doesn't just carry Void, they embody it. Using the Void Heart, they unify every fragment of the Abyss into a single will, which is why, in the game's best endings, they shed their physical form entirely, transforming into that fabled being known as the Shade Lord, a manifestation of pure metaphysical darkness. From a raw stats perspective, this state only makes the Knight even more unquantifiably powerful. However, as a hacks ability, a body made of pure void has many advantages. Offensively, the Black Egg, a non-living void construct, shows the main function of void, as simply being in its presence drains the light from Hornet's soul in seconds. So the Knight, as a soulless being of pure void, is adept at draining enemies of their very life force, to the point that Soul is used as an in-game magic bar to cast spells in Hollow Knight, with the Shade Lord doing the same passively, as its body could physically consume the radiance and all her light. Defensively, many void beings seem to phase through attacks or dematerialize at will. This is best shown by the Knight's Shade Cloak ability, which allows it to bypass any physical damage. Although, considering void creatures can still perish to spikes, despite being able to turn into literal particles, this intangibility is definitely debatable, but it should be noted, as the opposite of dreams or essence, void beings can also travel back and forth to the dream realm, linking them directly to one of the Knight's most critical tools, the Awoken Dream Nail. This talisman allows the Knight to cut through the veil between worlds and enter a dream. While I've pushed back on dream scaling as a basis for universal power, accessing a spiritual plane tied to every living mind in Hallownest is arguably far more dangerous. As, if you remember, I said there were 2 situations where the Knight could perish in a dream world. These two events, at the White Palace and Radiance boss fights specifically, seem to end your life either due to their connection with higher beings, or because these locations are the real physical versions of something trapped inside a dream. Either way you'd choose to interpret it, both ideas actually apply to the Knight, which is why in canon we've already seen them unalive 4 separate characters from within their dreams, Freddy Krueger style. Even when faced with their own death, the Knight seemingly never dies outright, as upon defeat, the Knight leaves behind a shade, a ghostly remnant that can be reabsorbed into its shell after returning from the nearest bench. Now, while I personally don't think this bench respawn is canon, since the Knight's Vessel siblings clearly didn't do much respawning, along with Steel Soul mode completely removing the mechanic and the NPCs tied to it, despite allowing other canon deaths in the dream world, you could still 100% argue its legitimacy, especially in the Void Heart endings. Now, surely with all that at its disposal, something here must play a role worth mentioning against this as-of-yet ominously unexplained child. So, let's compare the mountain of preamble we gave for the Knight to Frisk. Frisk fights Azrael, and Azrael's only goal, his literal sole objective, is destroy reality. No metaphors, no dream dimensions, just straight up poof. No more universe. Every character, guidebook, flavor text, and check stat surrounding Undertale supports and reaffirms the claim that Azrael is a mathematically infinite force, trying to argue that this wouldn't at least qualify as a universal power would require a near Herculean feat of mental gymnastics, with a multiversal interpretation making much more sense for a character destroying a game about infinite resetting timelines. And Frisk, powered by determination, their own metaphysical void-like substance generated from the soul, is Azrael's stated equal. They tank his strongest attacks, prevent his control over the timeline, and survive his blatant full power. Then, I guess just to clear any doubt, an equally strong Geno Frisk cuts out the middleman and finishes Azrael's plan for him, destroying the entire world of Undertale in a single attack. Meaning, there's no ending where a true max DT Frisk doesn't blow the Knight's current stats out of the water. You could unironically grant every aspect of dream scaling. Say each dream is its own universe, making the dream realm thousands of combined universes big, and it still wouldn't reach Azrael if you buy the multiversal logic. From there, even if the Knight tried to use one of its crazy niche abilities or charm loadouts to beat Frisk, it basically turns into the Knight trying to play a perfect rock, paper, scissors type counter solution, but Frisk responds with gun. Sure, Frisk only has one super notable ability, but considering that ability is the meta-defying, fourth wall breaking power to save the game via determination, what could the Knight feasibly do? Respawn powers are no good as soon as Frisk saves over their death, resets rule out any hope of trapping or sealing Frisk, and the Red Soul, as the source of Frisk's determination power, scales to all their physical feats, while showing its own resistances to stronger monsters than the Knight directly attacking it. At that point, going full Shadelord domain expansion mind attack seems like the Knight's only real shot, but even that falls apart when you remember ordinary bugs like the mantises could resist mental attacks like the infection through their sheer willpower. So pitting the Shadelord's essentially featless mind attacks against Frisk, someone so determined that they could will dreams into reality and refuse death entirely, yeah, it's not looking great. Then add on the fact that Frisk's final genocide attack canonically destroyed everything, including intangible spirits, liquidous immortal creatures, and time-space itself, I don't see how destroying a pure void being would be any different, even if you think they're an intangible hive mind. So yeah, I know this matchup sucks for the Hollow Knight fans. It's no fun seeing a game among the pantheon of greats be slandered so. But hey, I'm sure Hornet is bound to get the get back soon enough. Plus, Chris is the better Knight matchup anyways. And that's all for today. Thanks, everyone.